And it just kind of made me realize that there's people out there like that are just achieving mass success financially. And it wasn't so much that I became sort of transfixed by that. I just wanted to see like what the opportunities were. So my name's Mike Mortlock. I'm the managing director of MCG Quantity Surveyors. So I guess my background is I'm a little freckled kid from country New South Wales, moved to sort of as big a smoke as I could stomach to Newcastle when I was about 16 or 17. And yeah, I guess the day to day is running the MCG Quantity Surveyors team, specifically on the tax side. That's my specialty, with my business partner Marty, who's more on the traditional sort of estimating side.
Fantastic. Just curious, how did the name MCG Quantity Surveyors come about? What does that stand for?
It's the worst story, honestly.
I
And,
love
you know,
this.
and it's painful too, because you get people ringing up saying, I left my hat there. I'm like, you didn't leave it here. You're talking about the MCG, the cricket ground, right? So the actual name of the company is M Consulting Group, like the letter M, because we thought, oh, you know, that's like Bond, is like the BMW M Sport. I'm Mark. I'm Mike. I don't even know my name. I'm Mike. He's Marty. You know, so there's like, I'm Mike Moore, MM, you know, like, so it's just like M Consulting Group, because we thought like, you know, maybe we'll do something else. We don't just want to be talking about our specialty. And then M Consulting Group is MCG. So it's MCG Quantity Surveyors. I
Okay,
wish it
great.
was a better story, honestly.
Luckily, it's not the MCG that we're getting confused about. So
Yeah, I tell you what, though, they are very difficult to out SEO. If you search MCG, you're not going to find us.
It must be hard, yes. Fair enough. All right, well, let's just talk a little bit about your day. I'm curious, like, what do you do day to day? Maybe share with us in 60 seconds or less. Yeah, what is it that you currently do?
Yeah, it's changed a lot since we started, because in starting the business, we started from our bedroom. So day one, I was doing everything. But now, you know, it's more the ivory tower stuff. It's no real work, you know.
It's for all your workers.
Yeah. I've got the easy job. I mean, it's mostly just kind of overseeing things from a strategy point of view, relationship building and media and blogging and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, just what you would expect of a small business that's you know, trying to grow and looking after the team and the relationships we've got with people that put their support in us.
Yeah, that's great. Just curious, how did you start MCG initially when you actually thought, okay, this is great? Because you've had a bit of background experience working for one of the other, I guess, quantity surveyors as well too.
Yeah. Well, I guess I got to the point where there wasn't really sort of much further that I could go in that business. The guys that started it, they've sort of since left, but at that time they were sort of beginning their transition to leaving the business. That, you know, I would ask a question and we're like, oh, one of the directors in the south of France, the other one's in Bali, so we've got to wait till they come back to get an answer. I'm like, you know, and there was a level of management above me, but there was no way for me to sort of make myself known to sort of progress. So I kind of thought, I've learned everything that I could here. There were certain parts about the culture that changed over the years, which, you know, I didn't enjoy. I had more fun in the beginning, and I just hated being stale and I hated being bored. So I left there, got a consulting gig in the rail industry, just like to pay the bills, and then sort of started building the systems that I needed to start the business with my business partner, Marty, and we just kind of went from there.
Fantastic. And how long has it been running for now?
2011 we started, so we're coming up to 10 years.
10 years. Yeah, because I have seen your practice for quite a while, actually. I mean, when I first started in property, I did see your brand around a while, you know, with all the other quantity surveyors. And there's not that many in the market, actually. You know, it's mostly you guys at the top too.
There's not. Well, that's very kind of you to say.
It's true, though.
We're definitely not the biggest. I think depending on who you talk to, we might be, you know, one of the more prolific from a content point of view. So easy to see us around, and we definitely try and do that. We're trying to lead from the front, whilst we might not be the biggest. We kind of think that, you know, leading from the front is more about the initiatives that we're doing. You know, like industry first data releases and education and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, we're having a lot of fun, really enjoying it. And yeah, there's a bit of competition out there, and there's a few new players in the marketplace, but yeah, we've got our own little niche, and yeah, we're happy with it.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Mike, let's talk a little bit about you and getting to know you personally. Firstly, share with us where you grew up.
Yeah, so I was born in Penrith, and I left when I was 2. My parents brought me. That wasn't sort of a solo trip, of course. And I moved to Yerong Creek, which is such a small town that it shouldn't even really exist. It's basically 2 tumbleweeds bumping together, and that's the town. It's sort of near Wagga Wagga, and so I went to primary school there. So from 2 to about 11. I was elected the primary school captain at the end of year 5, just as we had to leave. So I never served a day in office, I like to say. I got the badge. They did give me the school captain's badge, but I never actually got to do it. So then moved to Griffith, which interestingly, both those places are, within about 200K of your first investment in West Wyalong. And in that area of the world, 200K is just kind of like a milk run, like that's not a big
very
distance.
True. No, yeah, very true. I remember when I went out towards that way, I was like, oh gosh, it's just space.
It's just flat.
Yes.
It's just flat. Yeah. And yeah, so I mean, Wagga, Griffith, similar sort of places, and then moved to a place called Caves Beach, which is sort of between Newcastle and the Central Coast. When I was about 16, and I've hovered around the same sort of Lake Macquarie, Newcastle area ever since.
Wow. So what was the reason for the move? I'm assuming your parents said, look, we've got to, move to a different location. What was the reason behind that?
Yeah, look, the reason for going to the country to begin with is my parents thought that would be a great place to start a family, and then moving from Wagga to Griffith was my old man getting a different job in the company that he was working for, and then yeah, basically we moved to the coast because I had a lot of health issues growing up. I had some chemical sensitivities and I had chronic fatigue syndrome. And it's the sort of place where a dust storm could nearly take your life away, because dust it's not like the normal dust that you would see in a city.
Yeah.
And the crop dusters would spray over the top of your head, and it just kind of wasn't my jam. My body was not really enjoying it. So we moved to the coast, sea breeze. And, I think I remember at the time my sister was furious at me leaving all of her friends, and now I sort of make fun of her, saying like, you could be living there still right now. And she's like, oh, thank God for that.
Wow, I can totally understand, because my kids also have allergies as well, and we've actually had to move in a number of places due to that fact as well too. Dust allergies is very, very common. Actually, my son has a very strong dust allergy as well too, so I can totally understand. So did it make a huge difference when you moved to the coast, and that's the reason why you stayed there for that long?
Yeah, I don't know necessarily that if it's the reason why I've stayed there, like from a health point of view. My health sort of started to get pretty well once I became sort of like a later teenager or young adult. But yeah, like it made a big difference. And, honestly, moving from the country to the coast, like there's something about the coast now. Like I would feel like psychologically sort of privated in a way if I wasn't near the ocean. Now I might only dunk myself in it once every 3 years, but just knowing that I could go there this afternoon just makes me feel nice.
Oh, totally. I mean, it's a completely different perspective. It's just nicer to be next to the water. I used to live where my parents used to live by the water as well. And it's just nice to wake up and look out and go, wow, this is fresh air and water and so forth like that.
Yeah.
Compared to being in the suburbs, which I don't mind that. It's great for family and stuff like that. But it is becoming very, very, dense out this way, with all the suburbs and so many buildings and so forth. So it's, different lifestyle altogether.
And
So,
Lake Macquarie is great because, I mean, it's compared to Sydney, which is where most of, I guess, our business is in Sydney. Like we probably do more in Brisbane and Melbourne individually than we do like in the Newcastle area. It just happens to be where we live. But, property is cheap. It's getting up there, but you can buy a place that's 2 or 3 times the size as you could in a similar suburb of Sydney. And, you know, like for someone who is kind of like a country kid at heart, this is like all you need. Like if I feel like Ethiopian tonight, I can get it, you know. That doesn't happen when you live in Griffith. It's like, do you want fish and chips, or do we just get the sausages?
Yeah, I was going to say it's sausage and mash or
Yeah,
steak and
yeah, at the bowling club.
at the bowling club. Yeah, absolutely. So it must have been a pretty big change. Obviously, being young, you know, it didn't really matter too much, except your sister must have been bothered by it. But
Yeah.
besides that, I guess I'm just wondering, it must have been a completely different sort of lifestyle change, because I guess living out in the country, probably a lot more quieter. I would have expected the air to be a lot more fresh out there, but you know, as you said, there's crops and so forth, so there must be a lot of pollen and so forth and dust. But moving out to the coast, there's probably a lot more to see, a lot more city, you know, life. Must be, you know, completely different lifestyle. How did you adapt to that?
It was a huge culture shock, but the entity that suffered the most was our Kelpie named Sam. He went from 50 acres to, you know, 720 square meters, and
Yeah.
he struggled more than anybody. That was a bit sad, so we had to make sure we took him on lots of adventures. But yeah, look, it was a massive culture shock, and it wasn't just, you know, moving from the wide open spaces to more of like a suburban style setup. It was also kind of like the people. Like I remember in high school, people getting teased for being poor. And when I went to high school in a place called Swansea, one of the guys I was friends with, Tim, people used to pay him out for being rich. It's like, oh, your dad's Microsoft shares must be going really well. And I'm like, this is the complete opposite. Like what is happening? I don't know what is right and what's wrong now, being rich or poor or something. I guess, you know, kids try to pick on you for whatever they can.
Well,
But yeah, it's just a different mindset. Like it was more about wealth in the country than it was city. That one just took me by surprise.
yeah. Oh, wow. So it is a complete opposite. So people in the country were talking more about wealth than
Yeah.
they were in the city.
Yeah.
That is completely, a surprise to me. I would not have ever expected that, to hear that from.
Another thing with being in Griffith too is like I've sort of, you know, got the privileged sort of background of being sort of like the most anonymous person on earth, really. Like I'm kind of like English, Irish stock, you know, typical white dude. But in Griffith, I was kind of like a minority because most people were Italian. And that was kind of like weird, because I realized that, oh no, wait, like here in Swansea, like there's no Italian people, like, and that took to some I guess getting used to.
That's fair enough. So let's talk a little bit about after high school. Obviously, you had a pretty good high school. Everything was there, and you know you went through to high school and finished. What did you do after that? Did you go out to start working, or did you continue further studies?
Yeah, so when I did year 11 and 12 at high school, I did part-time. So I was doing 3 subjects of the 6 year 11 and then 3 subjects of the 6 year 12. That was really just a health reason, to reduce that study load, which like I look back and have sort of regrets on that. I wish that never happened. So what actually happened then is I hadn't finished the HSC when I was supposed to in 2000 or whatever it was. So I ended up going to TAFE to finish the HSC in 2 years. So I did the 3 subjects of year 11 and the 3 subjects of year 12 in 1 year somehow. And then it just so happened that the HSC finished mid-year, and it's kind of like, well, you can't do nothing till the end of the year. You don't sort of really have a plan. Like all I wanted to do growing up was to be a fighter pilot, but with being on full-time medication, it was just that there was no chance. I mentioned my mate Tim before. He was my sort of best mate growing up, and he had epilepsy. So we were both like in the garage doing flexed arm hangs, trying to get the Air Force, you know, requirements. But it was the saddest thing in the world because neither of us had a chance. You cannot be an epileptic and be a fighter pilot, and I couldn't do it either. So I was pretty rudderless, and I kind of thought, well, you know, I'll look at the stuff that the TAFE was offering, and I ended up doing a real estate course. Now, I know that you can sort of, it seems like you can do one in the weekend these days, but I did a diploma that actually took a year. So it was like 9 till 3, 4 days a week or something, and that was years. So that was enough for me to be a licensee. And so, yeah, I just thought, well, all right, I'll go and do that, because I sort of was interested in property, but I'd love to say there was more strategy to it than that. It's embarrassing to admit, but like, it was pretty rudderless.
Oh, that's totally cool, because I think I sort of was a little bit like that as well too, because I went to TAFE to study for my real estate license as well. I guess mine was because I was as a real estate agent, and I had to actually get that before I could actually practice being a sales agent. But yeah, TAFE was a really good starting point. And to be honest, when I went to TAFE, comparison to say university, I felt that TAFE was a lot more practical, a lot more relevant. The experience there that I picked up, I could definitely apply to real world, whereas the things I learned in computer science, yeah, who talks about Java and C++, in the real world? It's like, yeah. So it's really interesting, because I personally thought that TAFE would be a lot better grounds for people to actually learn and then go out to the workforce, and it sets you up a lot better. But, unfortunately, the way the education system works, and hopefully people don't hear this about the education system, is that university is ranked higher than TAFE. So, yeah, it's fascinating how some things are just sort of upside down at this point in time, in my opinion.
And I think that's you've got your finger on the pulse there, because there'd be certain things where you need a degree just to begin. Like, I can't imagine yourself, starting a law firm without a degree, and they're like, I don't need that degree. I've just got street smarts and experience. But there's a lot of things like starting a business. Like, yes, there might be some legislative requirements, but you can hire someone who has those qualifications. So I think there's a lot of it that's going to become a little bit redundant, I think, or at least force the unis to be on the spot with what needs to be taught right now, rather than just trotting out the same degree for 10 years and expecting that it's relevant so far down the track.
Well, for the university that I currently work with as well too, they've actually gone from a student-led approach for subjects-based. So instead of actually pushing out the degree and saying, this is the degree with the subjects that you do, they've actually reversed it around and said, look, these are the subjects that you can choose from that you might be interested in, and that will make up your degree to do whatever you want to do, which is a lot more better.
Pick and mix degree.
Pick and mix, yeah, exactly. And that's what people want, or what students really want, because otherwise they're going to do a degree that doesn't have subjects that they're interested in or relevant to what they want to do. And they just basically waste 3 or 4 years in that degree going for that subject. And a lot of times people fail because they just don't want to turn up for those lectures or shoots and stuff. Whereas it's the other way around. It's like, oh, I really am interested in that subject, and I know that's going to count towards my degree. They're definitely going to turn up and, count those credits towards it. So I think it's a better approach, and the system is starting to change, especially with how the internet's evolved, how COVID's impacted. Learning, everything has to be now done virtually rather than physically on the campus anymore.
There's some weird stuff out there. Like, I did a construction management degree, and I was able to pick an elective, and I did sociology. Like, what has that got to do with construction management?
I have no idea too.
Maybe one of the only quantity surveyors that has also done, a 101 of sociology. So, if that's what you need on your next project, give me a call. It's a weird pitch, right?
It is. It's very funny. So let's talk a little bit about after TAFE. What happened after that? Did you actually jump into becoming a real estate agent, or did you actually go into a different path?
I don't like to admit this, but yeah, I finished my my TAFE on a Friday, and I started a real estate job on the Monday.
Wow.
And yeah, so I timed that like a champion. I would have liked a couple of weeks off, to be honest, but I was kind of thinking, all right, well, I'm all grown up now, I better go and do something. And I had an illustrious, I think, 10-month real estate career. I would say that I categorically failed. Really, because I still am, but back then definitely was a very sort of paralyzed introvert. So like in running a business and doing, podcasts and TV and stuff like that, you kind of have to either get over it or you will crash and burn. You can't sort of go to someone and they say, why should I work with you? And you go, oh, I don't know. I don't really know. But like I am an introvert. In my own time, I'll read a book and like to be left alone. But you can't be an introvert and be a really good real estate agent. I mean, maybe there are some analytical people that people just kind of want to work with because that's who they are as well. But it just didn't suit me at all. And there were some aspects of it where I kind of thought, like, I don't think that's the right thing to do. And then the boss would sort of say, but like, that's what I need you to do. I'm like morally kind of thinking this is a bit grim. So I ended up thinking, I like property. What is kind of going to give me the property stuff that I like with none of the sales, people, all that sort of stuff? And I ended up studying valuation.
Valuation. Okay, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. So that's it's a bit of a change there. So you went back to go back to TAFE again?
I went back to TAFE, and I was studying at night school, and I think my girlfriend at the time said, like, you're a bum, how come you've got no money? And I thought, oh, I better get a job or that she's going to ditch me. She she's not my wife at the moment, but that's, you know, that's a side issue. I say at the moment like I'm going through wives. And I yeah, so I was doing it at night school, and I ended up getting a job in a quantity surveying firm whilst I was doing the night school stuff, and I got probably like maybe about 75% through, and they changed it and they were going all to online instead of the classroom stuff. And I kind of was a bit lazy, thinking, I don't know if I really want to do that. The quantity surveying firm convinced me to change over to a Bachelor of Construction Management and get credits for that. It turns out I got 0 credits and had to start from scratch, and I basically abandoned an advanced diploma of real estate, being a valuer. And then I've gone back and I've done Masters of Property, and I've done 5/8 of that, which is again like deferred because I've been busy. The business got busy. So I've twice tried to be a qualified valuer and haven't quite got there. But I'm sure I'll go back and do the Masters. I've only got 3 subjects to go.
I was going to say, third time lucky. I'm pretty sure you'll finish it.
I'll get there. Yeah,
You'll get there.
I think I started that in 2011 or something. And it's funny, like I didn't do terribly well in the Bachelor of Construction Management. You know, my motto was P's get degrees, but with the Master of Property, I was more sort of like 90% plus average, just because I was far more interested in it. It was much more sort of valuation economics, like property economics style, than nuts and bolts construction. Like this is kind of the thermal mass of Hebel, you know, like I just couldn't care less.
That is very technical. I haven't even heard of that. I don't even know what property economics would be about. I thought it would just be, you know, the look and working out the big macro economy of property, but obviously it's a lot more detailed than that. So,
well, the construction management degree certainly was, but I mean, based on what I do today, I mean, we have to sort of estimate during doing the tax depreciation sort of things, but really, like, all of the main sort of information that I've got under my sort of fast growing grey hair is outside of the degree. I mean, it's giving me the estimating fundamentals, but I learned nothing about tax depreciation during that construction management degree, which is a bit weird to, like, that's my qualification, but a big chunk of it is just like you couldn't get it there.
That's fascinating. Half the time people actually go to study a degree and then come out and realize, hold on, half of this doesn't even relate to their job.
Yeah.
So it's sad, but you know, it's just the way it is. And that's where I think the real life experience comes with tax depreciation. All right. Well, it sounds really interesting because your story is continuing from there. At what stage did you actually jump into, quantity surveying? Because it seems like, you know, you've gone through this process of valuation, construction management. What happened after that?
Yeah. So I was studying a Bachelor of Construction Management while I was working for a quantity surveying firm. So there was a bunch of us doing that degree at the same time. So that was good. We had a bit of camaraderie. So we were all pretty much doing full-time work and full-time study load. So that was pretty epic. But, you know, like, I didn't have much else going on, so it was just, you know, smash it out sort of thing. And I was thinking, like, if I don't get a uni degree now, it'll never happen. And I was lamenting not going straight to uni after year 11 and 12 straight away. So yeah, got that done, and then worked with that business and ended up being one of the sort of co-managers of the tax team, and then learnt my trade craft, and that's when I sort of made the decision to move on with that arrogant notion that I thought I could do it better, you know.
And you have, you know, I think you've done very, very well, especially, you know, for that time, because a lot of businesses usually for the first 2 or 3 years when they first start don't make it. So you've already passed that stage, and you guys are almost a decade into business. So that's great news.
I can remember, like, I think it cost me and Marty about $7,000 each to start the business. So, you know,
Oh,
massive capital investment. And I can remember when we first like got that back after a week or a month or whatever, I'm like, yes, like milestone one hit. I haven't sunk money into a business that died. And then it just kind of incrementally went from there with a few funny things along the way.
fantastic. And let's talk a little bit more about your property journey, and I guess where you've delved into. Maybe share with the audience where and when you purchased property, your first property.
Yeah. So I purchased my first property in a place called Waratah, which is sort of like right near the Newcastle Uni area, which has done like pretty well from a capital growth point of view for that reason. It's about, depends on the traffic. It used to be a $10 cab fare to any restaurant in Newcastle, but now I've got an index for, I think it might be 20 now. It's, you know, like under normal traffic circumstances, it's 10 or 15 minutes sort of into the CBD. And that was a place that I knew I wanted to get into property. I ended up sort of, that was the principal place of residence, but also I rented out the front section of it. So it was a 2-bedroom place that I converted into 3-bedder. And I was kind of, I wouldn't say there was much sophistication going into that investment property, but I was interested in the stuff that I learned in valuation, like the highest and best use, about, you know, comparable sales. Like if you're comparing 2-bedders to 3-bedders, and, you know, the 3-bedders are worth an extra 80 grand. Well, if I can make my 2 into 3 for 10 or 12 grand, then that's maybe that's going to work, right?
Yeah, it did.
So I was living with a flatmate, and I bought that house, and basically picked up the keys and said, all right, I'm off to Thailand for 14 days, and let him deal with like a rat's nest that was found in the backyard, like carpet that was probably a breach of his human rights. It was pretty rough.
Okay, go tell me about this story. This is getting interesting.
Well, I just kind of thought I'd never really bought anything much before, but like in that week, you know, I basically bought a holiday to Thailand, wrote off a $10,000 car because my insurance had lapsed. I missed out on that. So basically just set fire to 10 grand. So, you know, this is not an inspirational financial story if you haven't got that already. And bought this property, which I think I paid 230 grand. It was a 2-bed that had a weird sort of setup that I knew I could turn it into 3, but I'd have to cut a hole in sort of like the front wall, which was actually external. So at the beginning, my flatmate agreed to sort of move with me into this new place, and he just ended up paying the same rent that we were both sort of sharing at this other place. And yeah, in fairness to him, that probably was not fair. It was a bit of a step back. And I thought, oh, the house is right. But when I got back, he's like, dude, you don't know what I've had to deal with while you've been, you know, off in Thailand. And I'm like, oh, well, some of like the days we had to be in the back of a truck on a dirt road. And he's like, no, don't even.
Oh, I could not imagine. That's hilarious. So what happened at that particular point? He obviously wasn't happy with what was there. Did you guys resolve that at the end of the day, or
we did? We're still mates. He ended up having what I can only describe as an illegal bonfire in the backyard to get rid of the jungle and the rat's nest that was in some sort of, you know, concrete barbecue thing. And yeah, like thankfully he was there looking after that. He had a few parties with his mates, and, you know, there were a few cans lying around when I got back, but, you know, I kind of thought on balance, like you do whatever you like. Just look after the place.
Just look after the place. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And then like him and I were, met because we were both dating, sisters. So yeah, so I've got to clarify that because I don't want it to sound like, oh, gee, like he really is from the country. I don't mean, no one was related in this story apart from the sisters. So there was an older and a younger sister, and he was dating the younger sister and I was dating the older sister. And we met through that and ended up living together. And that was kind of cool because, you know, we all had sort of stuff in common. I sort of was stopped going out with the older sister sort of not long after buying that house, maybe it was the rats, I don't know, chicks don't really dig it, I guess that's what I learned. I think it might have been a little bit before actually, but and so his girlfriend was coming over, and at that time, my 2-bedroom that I turned into 3 did have 3 bedrooms, but it necessitated him coming through my bedroom to get to his bedroom. So it was kind of like all sorts of weird, like there was like an impromptu towel rail that we put up as a bit of a privacy barrier. He really did put up with a lot. I should probably go and drop off a bottle or something to him.
Oh, I'm loving that story. That's so hilarious. Our good friends, always look out for each other. So I'm pretty sure he sounds like a very good friend.
Yeah. And I like, for anyone that sort of looks at someone like me and thinks like the life is glamorous or anything like that, I don't know if anyone does that. Maybe just my mum. It's certainly pretty rough and ready. There's no silver spoon in the mouth. And whilst I'm, comfortable now, it was definitely wasn't handed.
It's fascinating to hear about that particular story about that 2 to 3. Do you still have that property at the moment, or is
I wish I did. I still drive past it and I think, no, I ended up selling that for, I think it was 350 something. So it worked out about like 8 odd percent return per year. So, I mean, that was pretty good, but I really wanted to keep it. But I ended up purchasing a property with my wife, and by selling that, we could get a little bit further to what we wanted. In hindsight, it was probably a mistake, but I mean, like, there's sort of financial decisions, and then there's life. And I think, like, people ring me up sometimes and say, well, what investment property should I buy for tax depreciation? And I say, well, it's an apartment in a complex of 600 with 8 gyms and 14 pools. And they're like, that sounds like a terrible investment. And I say, yes, it is. But that's not the question you asked me. You didn't say, what's a good investment? So I'm like, don't do things just because of the tax reason, or don't do everything because of finances. So, I mean, maybe that's my excuse for that. But
it's the truth though, because we all are human and we have some form of emotional lifestyle choices that we make. The whole reason why we do invest into property is just a vehicle to get to our lifestyle or the choices that we want in our life.
Yeah.
If we didn't do that, then what's the purpose of investing into property? Is it just to have more money sitting in the bank? I don't think so.
I'm not really interested in money at all. Like I think I'm interested in freedom. Like everything I own is kind of cheap and worn out. My one weakness is I do like European motor vehicles. Apart from that, I'm like blemish free, right? And that doesn't make me a bad person. That's just like a coincidence.
That's your lifestyle choice. It's your lifestyle choice.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. All right. Well, Mike, let's take it on a different side. You may have already mentioned some of these moments too, but let's take a look at the aha moment in your time. Share with us along your property journey, where was it that you've had maybe an aha moment that go, okay, property or, things just really clicked in place for you?
Yeah. I think in some ways I'm still waiting for things to click in place for me, but I haven't had any like real sort of Rubicon moments or transformative sort of things happen. But one thing that I thought about was when I first discovered that there was a whole world out there that I didn't realize. Now that kind of sounds obvious coming from country New South Wales, right? Like one day I'm going to leave this town. But when I was doing inspections, like doing tax depreciation inspections and going and looking at, some expensive apartments in Sydney, I came to the conclusion that when you grow up, everyone is kind of like you. Like your parents' friends are sort of like the first people you see outside of your family. Or your friends and their parents, they're all kind of earning the same amount of money. They all live in the similar style houses. There's not a lot of diversity, certainly in the country. So I kind of thought that that's what everything was like. And then I got an insight, walking into these places that were worth $10 million, and I'd never seen a property, until I started inspecting stuff. I'd probably never walked into $1 million place before, and then walking into $10 million places and realizing, like, you know what, I would love to live in their garage. you know, like that was
just the garage.
just the garage, you know, like I would just be like that. I would know I'd made it. I would ring up my mates like, come around, you got to see, like this kid's, you know, doing good. And it just kind of made me realize that there's people out there like that are just achieving mass success financially. And it wasn't so much that I became sort of transfixed by that. I just wanted to see like what the opportunities were. And like I was trying to say before, I'm not sort of intoxicated by money. I'm intoxicated by freedom and choice. I mean, that if there's any driver for me, it's that. And you know, money kind of has to be a calculation to get to that, and it can appear like that's the actual goal. But for me, it's just like wake up and today I feel like a baguette. You know, I'm off to Paris. Or today I think like I really want to be a hang glider. You know, so you can go and do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's what we don't realize, or we kind of get mixed up all in this world, because you know, there's so much out there. There's so many people posting on Facebook and social media sharing that, you know, this is the life and so forth. But at the end of the day, you know, it's not necessarily about the money. Just as you said, it's the freedom, it's the choices, it's the lifestyle things that you can actually get to do with whatever you make for the money. And at the end of the day, money is just a byproduct. It helps us be able to transact, and that's it, you know. But if you can actually focus on what it is in terms of the goals, whatever you want to do in your life, then that's really, you know, what you've got to do is just figure out how to actually do it in the background. Because once it's been set and done, you've reached that goal, basically it just sits there and just happens in the background. You won't even notice it's there.
Exactly. And like I encourage people to come to the view that social media is a lie. You know, like people put their curated best lives, right? Like I've got pictures on my Instagram of me duct taping one of my favorite shoes up because I didn't want to throw it in the bin. You know, like I'm trying to buck the trend and show, well, this is like my life is like, it's not glamorous at all. And I posit that maybe bits of your life aren't either. Let's see that. I want to see what's real, you know, like sick of all these attractive people with their arms sort of folded in front of a Learjet going, you know, this is my Wednesday. I'm like, come on.
Come on.
Don't you just wake up and hate yourself sometimes? Maybe that's just me.
No, it's true. Social media has turned so much around, especially Facebook. There's a lot of impact in that, you know, making it look like as though it's glamorous and stuff. And then when you read it, you go, oh, come on, you know, that's not real. Or it just makes you feel even worse because you just either want that or you just think, oh, I can't have it at this point in time.
I worry about kids that aren't sort of developed enough to understand that, and it feeds into this kind of consumerism and the planned obsolescence of things like iPhones. You know, that stuff doesn't last, and you got to get the next thing, otherwise, you know, you're going to get crap for it at school. This sounds a bit sort of, you know, I'm getting really old, I guess, and conspiracy
it's so true.
theories,
they do not make anything as good as they used to. Like devices die after about 2 or 3 years or so, and they force you to do an upgrade. There's a reason why they do that, because otherwise you won't spend more money. And same thing, washing machines and all the white good appliances, after a period of time, they just die and then you have to go and buy it. Whereas when I had my one, that was like 20 years ago, it's lasted for 20 years. I'm like, why do they make them like the way they are? They're very smart.
Soon our toasters will be Bluetooth. And I think like as you go to the checkout and you go to place your Bluetooth toaster on the counter, just maybe pause for a second and go, why is my toaster Bluetooth? What is happening to the world?
Oh, it's before the internet, before the iPhone. So I think it was a lot better, but you know, that's my opinion. All right. Well, let's delve into a little bit about, I guess, your property investing strategy and your journey. You've shared with us your first property that you purchased. You talked a little bit about some of the moments in time. Tell us a little bit more about where your portfolio is at this point in time and what you're planning to do as well.
Yeah, look, I guess I'm envious of a lot of the young guys that you see around, and you probably have interviewed a lot of them that are, you know, getting to their, you know, early 20s with 6-10 properties or $5 million of equity or whatever. I think some of that is also a little bit of a beat up, and I've sort of pushed against the number of properties as being a goal, like, because like, do you want 10 properties in West Wyalong or Mossman? You know, like they're not the same, right? No disrespect to
of course,
brothers and sisters in West Wyalong. But yeah, like I started pretty late. I kind of subscribe to the, I guess, the growth philosophy to begin with, and sort of realize, well, yeah, that's cool, but you're very, very quickly run out of capacity if you're chipping into your pocket each day. And, you know, like, I guess I've always earned maybe a little bit more than average, but not by a tremendous amount. Like, I don't have the capacity to just keep chipping into the pocket. So from there, I kind of went to the cash flow side, but more from a balance. And one of the biggest sort of things that I've learned, and there's some great people that I've spoken to that probably have coined this better than I have, but it's like fitting the property to the portfolio. So like at any stage in the portfolio, you're a bit too negatively geared, so you need something that's a bit more cash flow, or you're heading to the end of your portfolio, so you want to kind of sell down and focus on the commercial assets that are higher yielding and that sort of stuff. So my wife and I made a decision that we weren't sort of going to share the numbers and the net wealth position and that sort of stuff. But like I have a modest portfolio, certainly in the growth phase, and will still be for, I would imagine, another 10 or 20 years. I'm getting old, but I'm, still got a bit more work to do.
Still got a lot in you, yeah.
I've aged terribly, but I'm only 38. I don't think that's terribly old. So yeah, like, and to be honest, the focus for me personally has been much more on the business. So I've wanted to be careful to not throw all the eggs in one basket, and diversify. So in many ways, I'm building the business as an asset, not with the idea that I will sell it or anything like that, but it has a value. And then there's the property as well. And they're two very sort of different things, and one can help with the other. Certainly the returns in the business were better than I could have achieved with property, just because we've had such great growth since we've started. We managed to get on the Fast 100 list a couple of years ago with an average growth over 4 years of 41%. So there wasn't really an opportunity for me, at least with my rudimentary property investing skill set, to go and get a return like that. So I've definitely sort of focused more on that, to the detriment of property, but it'll enable me down the time to be able to purchase property outside of the equity growth. So, I mean, that's a great thing with building a business. We're still in the growth phase, so it's not a hugely profitable enterprise because we're thinking more into the future, but that's certainly the goal, where I won't have to wait till revalue to buy a property. I could just be buying properties from the dividend. So yeah, that's where I'm at the moment.
That's fantastic. And I think the great thing is that you still are in touch with property because you are actually involved in that industry as well. So you do get to see and keep up to date what's happening in the market. So therefore, jumping back into buying more property or investing into more property is going to be very, very easy for you to do anyway, which is a great thing because, you want that complementary skill set, especially in your industry too.
And of course, interviewing people on my podcast about, buyers agents and development experts and that sort of stuff. I'm constantly sharpening the tip of the spear just by staying in touch with those people. Of course, we have relationships with referrers as well. A whole nother half of our business is really just working with developers and development projects, doing feasibility and progress claims for development. So we're seeing things pre-construction and coming out of the ground to completion, and then post-construction with the tax side of things. So we're plugged in pretty well to that, and there'll certainly be some opportunities and some connections and joint venture things that will hopefully fall in the lap at a point in time where I've got the cash to take the best advantage of it.
Totally. I'm also curious, and to share with the listeners, just in case they're not aware of what Quantity Surveyors can do and how it can actually benefit them for their property investment, because we are sort of on this topic at the moment. What are some of the things that you could probably share with the listeners that Quantity Surveyors can actually help them with regards to their property investments?
Yeah. So there's really two sides, I would say, and in our business, certainly there's the traditional construction cost estimating. So that would be how much is it going to cost me to build XYZ, right? So you might do that because you want to do a major renovation, or you want to build a house, or you want to go to a bank to get finance to do a development. So quantity surveyors, our special skill set is construction cost estimating. There's no other industry that's better qualified to estimate construction costs. So anything around estimating construction, that's a big part of it. Of course, post-construction, we're doing things like replacement cost estimates for insurance. And probably the thing that people would see more advertised and as a property investor is the tax depreciation side of things. And that's really my sort of special skill set on the resi and commercial and industrial side. And the advantage of a tax depreciation schedule for a property investor could be simply put as you pay less tax. So when you buy a property, it has a couple of different components in it. There's the land, and then there's the improvements to the property. So we don't provide a market valuation, which includes land. We're only looking at what was the cost to build, what was there as at the date that it was built. And then you can claim deductions based on the wear and tear of the structure, and then the fixtures and fittings inside where they qualify. And so essentially it's just a report. I laughed to someone the other day. I said I'm basically in the PDF business, right? We just sell PDFs, right? PDF reports, you know. And this tax depreciation PDF, I mean, we can give you a printed one if you want, but it's mostly PDFs. Yeah. It just says in this year for this property, you've got $11,000 worth of tax deductions, for example. And if you're on 100K, you're going to pay 24 grand of tax. If you're on 89K, which is 100 minus that 11, you're going to pay about 20 grand of tax. Obviously the marginal rates all change, do your own research, but that's about a $4,000 saving for a $600 or $700 report. So that's the power of depreciation.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And when should actually people get the depreciations and reports done?
Yeah, look, I always say today or yesterday if you can manage it. The reason why is because from when we started, we collected data pretty forensically because I wanted to tell stories about property investing in Australia. And personally, I was sick of quantity surveyors saying on average, we get $5,000 to $10,000 worth of deductions. And I'm like, well, that's not an average, that's on range. So I started collecting that. And once we got to 1,000 reports, I said, well, on average, we get $9,183. And I shared 2 decimal places just to show that I was paying attention, right? So we've collected data from the date of the settlement to the point that people actually engage us to prepare a depreciation schedule. And it's nearly 4 years on average that people wait. Now, if people don't know, you can actually back claim 2 financial years worth of deductions, right? But if you wait longer than that, you can miss out on those deductions. And we found that 6.7% of all of our investors actually wait too long, and the average amount that they lose is about $20,500. I think it's 537. That's a big chunk of cash, and depending on your marginal rate, it could be 6 or 8 grand out of their pocket. So that's why I say, like, don't put it off. Talk to a quantity surveyor, get a free estimate. I'm pretty sure every quantity surveyor will give you a free estimate, right? It's not it's not like a sales pitch. It's like agents are still saying, you know, free market estimates in your street this Thursday. Ring them up, they'll come anytime, right? They want listings, right? We're kind of the same. We'll do a free estimate. And I don't think that there are any quantity surveyors out there that would recommend a schedule that's not beneficial either. So it costs you nothing to look at it. Send it to someone like myself and say, here's my property. You can see basically all the information you need from a realestate.com listing. Is it worthwhile doing it? Yes, no. And if it's yes, then, you know, do it, right? Because it's paying you more than what it costs. It's a pretty good product to sell, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the reason why I also got a depreciation schedule done for my residential property when I first moved out of it as an investment property. So does that mean then it's actually wise if you do purchase a property that you should actually get depreciation schedule done soon after settlement? Then that would be sort of the ideal time. That way you've got that in place. But do you need to actually? Yeah.
Sorry, I'll let you finish your question.
And I was going to say, do you need to update that regularly, like every few years, or will it actually last you for? You know?
Yeah. We recommend basically getting it at settlement, and often like before the tenants move in. is a great time. It's just one of those things, you're doing your pests and your building pre-settlement, get it done straight away. The main reason why we used to say that is because it was taking a snapshot of the property. And if things changed over time, say you ripped some things out, you might be able to claim scrapping on those assets. Because of the legislation changes in May 2017, that kind of old system doesn't really work anymore, but I still recommend people get it done straight away, just so it's not something that they forget and that they don't become one of those statistics I was talking about before. There was a lady in our study who bought an apartment off the plan who waited 16 years to contact us. And I would estimate that's about $65,000 worth of missed deductions. And that, that sort of stuff keeps me up at nights, like I have nightmares
it
about
would me too.
That maybe shows I've got a bit of a sad life, but yeah, and once you get a depreciation schedule, you don't need to update it every year. Pretty much a depreciation schedule, all the major companies will do a 40-year schedule. That's really the maximum life of a built structure. So say a brand new building has a 40-year effective life. That's why we do 40-year schedules. And you wouldn't need to update that report unless you're doing major renovations. So if you add like a split system air conditioner, there's no estimating required. You can give that to your accountant, say I bought it on this date for this month, and they can plug it in. Or a lot of companies will do free updates if it's one or two items as well. We certainly do that.
So in a situation, I'm asking this for myself as well. If I had a property which I've recently renovated and I didn't do a depreciation schedule, will there actually be a big change in terms of that? Because I'm just wondering, have I potentially missed out, say, a year's worth of depreciation that hasn't been affected after the renovations? That may change as well.
It's a very, very good question. It depends. It's always annoying to have to give an answer like that. But I'll make it brief. If you've spent, say, $100,000 on renos, the total depreciation that we can claim over the life of that improvement is $100,000, right? We can't get you more money. But if you spend $100,000 and it includes carpets, blinds, oven, cooktop, range hood, hot water system, then those are plant and equipment assets that depreciate at a higher rate. So you want to tease those out, apply those higher percentages. Otherwise, instead of waiting 40 years to get your deductions back, you might be getting all of that money within 8 years, or in some cases 1 year, right? So that's the real value, because people might buy a brand new house or build a brand new house, and they say to me, why do I need you to estimate the construction cost when it says here on my contract? But it doesn't say that you got $4,000 worth of carpet or $1,800 worth of cooktop. And builders don't tend to itemize major renovations based on the Commissioner of Taxation's effective life categories from TR 2019/4, right? That's not their special skill. So if you know what you're doing and you know, okay, well, it's going to have these plant and equipment items in it, and there's really only 2 pages of legislation in that document I just mentioned that are plant and equipment, you could actually say to your builder, how much have you spent on this? But then on top of that, we can actually include them as total installed costs. So if you're paying $800 for your cooktop, that might just be buying the item, not paying for an appropriately qualified person to install that. So that's where it becomes problematic. So I would say if it's a bigger renovation or you don't have a breakdown of those things, then it's worthwhile getting a report. But a good quantity surveyor should be able to help you through that determination. And I relish the opportunity to turn people away, because they end up becoming raving fans because that you've done something honest. You've said, go away, I can't help you with this because I can't sleep with myself. I can't live with myself if I'm charging you for this and I'm not doing any value. And they'll come back and say, oh, well, what about this? They're almost excited to give you money. It's kind of a weird thing, right? And, I thought everyone was like that in business, but, there's people out there that just aren't doing the right thing by people. So
yeah, that happens. It's always that 5% or whatever it is that's out there that just doesn't do the right thing and makes a bad name for, the rest of the industry, unfortunately. Yeah, no, definitely. It's fascinating to be able to hear that, and I hope that value for listeners out there would actually be able to get them to look at depreciation, because it's such a big component that doesn't really get talked about very much. I mean, we talk about the finance, we talk about buy property, talk about renovations and structuring, but we never seem to go into too much about quantity surveying because it's not a topic that people actually go, something we need to do. But I think it should be standard after settlement that they do that, because man, there's so many deductions that can be claimed. It's only after the accountant look at it in the financial year, you go, where's your tax depreciation schedule?
If you follow me on LinkedIn or Facebook, you can't get away from tax depreciation legislation. So yeah, I mean, you're right. We don't talk about, I talk about it all the time and I've done that for about 15 years, but not everyone's paying attention because it's boring, right? And that's a real challenge for me, is to take tax legislation and make it something that people want to listen to. But a better way to pitch it is sort of like free money. I don't think Facebook would allow sort of advertising like that. But yeah, it's not mandatory, but if you don't do it, you're going to pay more tax than you need to. So that's right. So that's why you should, you don't have to learn everything about it, but you should know what it is and have a person. I know you always talk about property investing being a team sport. Someone on your team should be a quantity surveyor.
Totally. That's great. All right, well, let's switch up gears and talk about mindset. I'm also curious about why you actually started investing into property and also started to build your business. I mean, you've kind of touched on a little bit of it, saying you wanted to actually get away from your previous company and do your own thing, kind of thing. But what's the bigger reason behind all this?
Yeah, look, I guess with property, it started off as one of those things, like we've talked about before, people just kind of think, oh, well, buying property, that's a good thing, right? And I should do good things because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Buying a property is planning for your future, and putting more super away is good and all that sort of stuff. So I didn't have a tremendous amount of sophistication behind it in the beginning. To be honest, there's an argument to say I still don't now. But after seeing the results of investors that are coming back and buying multiple things, and you can look at stuff that they've bought and you're thinking like, wow, that's like way under market value. And I certainly saw heaps of that stuff with fund managers that buy a building for $16 million and 5 years ago it was sold for 22, and you're like, wow, I guess you just kind of wait. Renegotiate a couple of leases and there's your few $1 million. And that kind of was interesting to me. But the goal really evolved to being more about the freedom, like I mentioned before, just the ability to do anything that I want to do as a passion project and be able to provide for the family as well. And I'm just passionate about helping people. Unfortunately, I'm not clever enough to sort of be a heart surgeon or anything like that. My special skill is helping people save on tax. And yeah, that's boring and it's not going to win me a Nobel Peace Prize. But I like to see myself as a small part of people trying to do the same thing. Most investors want to get into property because they want to be able to spend more time with their family or take them on a holiday. Like, I think it's kind of like an altruistic thing. It's not that sort of typical viewpoint of the greedy landlord. I don't believe that rhetoric. So I just see myself as a small part of helping people to achieve their financial goals.
Fantastic. That's really, really great. And it's really, I guess, inspirational to be able to hear that, because I think at the end of the day, it's hard to find really the genuine people who actually want to definitely help, especially in the different industries and different niches within property. So you're definitely doing a huge impact for the industry, which is great. Let's talk about resources.
Kind of you,
that's true. It is true. And, as I said, I've been following you for quite some time, and been seeing a lot of interesting things that you've been sharing as well too. So talking about resources, books, mentors, maybe share with us some maybe perhaps books or resources that you currently use or listen to that you could recommend to the audience that you've actually been able to use in your own property journey as well.
Yeah, look, being in the property game sort of day in, day out, I don't consume a lot of property media, to be honest. Like, I have a lot of property friends and I read their stuff and interact with them and comment and that sort of stuff. But for people that are outside of the property game, and if I wasn't in property, I would be consuming this sort of stuff. Like, there's definitely a lot of really good podcasts out there, such as the one we're on right now. So if you're listening to this, I think you're on the right track, and I'd encourage people to go through the back catalog as well. And you can find your own guru there. So like podcasts like yours give yourself it gives people an opportunity to find someone that they relate to. Like, I like their sort of drive and their mission and their strategy or their approach. And I think you can find those people, and everyone's punching out quite a lot of content. So you can follow these people, and I'd encourage people to reach out as well. Like when I started, I kind of thought, these people are on a pedestal, and, it's a bit like, don't look Brad Pitt directly in the eye because he has a tantrum or something. That's unfair to Brad, but the prima, I've got no idea what he's like, of course, but I kind of thought it might be a little bit like that. So yeah, I would definitely recommend your podcast. I listen to the Elephant in the Room stuff as well.
Yeah.
The Planner, the Professor, and the Buyer's Agent. I always get that name wrong. But those guys are a good resource as well. I follow Pete Wargent's stuff. He's a daily blogger. He absolutely loves it. He's a crazy person and a good friend of mine. And there's plenty of good books out there as well. So it's not hard to find stuff to plug in there. And from like a business mindset sort of thing, I'm sort of pretty self-driven. So I don't. I guess I like sort of the factual learning stuff. So I'll sort of think, Sunday afternoon, I really want to learn JSON because I want to figure out if we can pass an API from our back end of our software or something.
You're a tech geek like me too.
I'm probably speaking your language. I'm not actually capable of writing JSON yet, but give me a bit of time. But like I've been, getting into some of the Gary V stuff. He's not my style, but there's some really interesting stuff that he's got out there. I've just read Extreme Ownership, and that really resonated with me as well. And just looking at people that I kind of I find quite inspiring. Like I read Elon Musk's biography, and there's a lot of kooky stuff going on with that dude. But the way that he is disciplined and driven, like when people say, "Oh, my mission is to grow my business," to $10 million or whatever. His mission is to put people on Mars.
That's right.
That's next level.
Big vision, yes. I love it when I hear those kind of stories, and I love Elon Musk's book too. Even though there were some really like, oh, okay, that's interesting. It's quite an eccentric type of personality, but his vision is huge. And I recently saw his National Geographic one, Space, I think it was called. And my gosh, it's fascinating just to be able to watch him just sit peacefully watching his rockets go up and down. Even if it crashes, he's still peacefully just observes and then just learns from all that. So much just to learn just from watching him and how he behaves and how he thinks and so forth. Fascinating. Well, let's take a step back. And if you were to meet yourself, say, 10 years ago, what do you think you would have said to him?
Oh, it'd probably be something that you're not allowed to say on this podcast, perhaps. I would sort of say, well, maybe like 10 years ago, I think I was on the straight and narrow. I started the business about 10 years ago. So, I was pretty keen to give it a red hot go, but I probably would have said to myself to be patient and to celebrate the wins. So in business, I've kind of set a bar to achieve, thinking like that would be amazing if we did that, and then sort of get there and the amazement dissipates and you look at the next one, and that's not a real good psychological approach. And I got to the point where I needed to sort of calm down, and I took up a hobby of like growing chili plants. And then it seemed like in an afternoon, I had 76 different plants of like 18 different species, and they were all cataloged, and I had the top 10 hottest in the world. I'm like, this is not why I started doing it. That's exactly the wrong thing. You've gone and done this again, So I think just to calm down a bit and celebrate the wins.
That's great advice. Yeah, hindsight's always good too.
Yeah, and going back like 15 or 20 years, I would say like, what are you doing, son? Like, get off your backside. I think like because I had a certain dream that got smashed, I just became a little bit sort of rudderless and, was just, drinking too much and having fun and doing all that sort of stuff, which I think everyone should do. It's a bit of a rite of passage, right?
Oh, yeah.
Not advocating binge drinking. I don't want to get in trouble, but I think I needed to say to myself, all right, well, like, sure, have a little bit of fun, but results kind of compound. So if you start doing something now, you're going to be so much further down the track in 10 years than if you start in 5 years. So I'd probably give myself an uppercut and a couple of curse words.
For sure. Hey, actually, I didn't get to ask you, and this kind of just triggered my memory about fighter pilot. What inspired you to want to become a fighter pilot?
Yeah, I always really was impressed with aviation. Like, just absolutely loved it. I don't know what it was, but it just sort of seemed like the extreme sort of personification. That's not the right term, but it was freedom, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
was just freedom, and I really sort of got into the military style stuff. Like, I really sort of bought into the, I guess, the brothership and the brotherhood and all that sort of stuff, and the technical side of things. I ended up like learning all of the different power to weight ratios and operational ceilings for Russian jets, and just I consumed all the data and that sort of stuff. And I just kind of thought, like, that is cool. Like, if I could achieve that as a goal, like, I would be like, yeah, Mike, you've done this. Like, well done, son.
That'll be awesome. Well, never too late.
Yeah, I think it almost certainly is. I don't know if I'd fit in a seat right now, but I mean, like, I'm really quite happy doing what I'm doing. I mean, I think I'd alienate people saying that I'm passionate about tax legislation. It's not that. It's more working with the people and working with the great team and my business partner and the guys that we've got here and the referrers that put their faith in us. Like, I have a blast, and I never wake up thinking, oh Christ, that thing again. So while ever that's the case, then I'm enjoying it.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Mike, last question for you. How much do you think your success is due to your skill, intelligence, and hard work? And how much of it is because of luck?
That's a good question. I don't really feel super lucky. I don't feel like anything's fallen in my lap. Like, you think from a business point of view, there could be someone that rings up and says, Mike, you're a great guy. Here's all my work, and I own Western Australia. Like, nothing like that has happened before. But I would really like to sort of say that life is one big lottery, really. Like, just being born. Like, I don't want to talk about the mechanics of family planning and that sort of stuff. Different sort of show.
Sure.
But your odds of being born are so low, and the odds of being born in a country like Australia, and sure, like, there were people richer than us, but I had a happy childhood. We didn't have much, but we had enough. I had the opportunities to go to school. So there's an amazing amount of luck to just be born with the privilege that I have. Other than that, I wouldn't say that it's like skill or any particular intelligence. I don't think I'm a genius by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm bloody competitive. Like, if you want to go to the mailbox, I'll race you. And that's why I had too many chili plants, and that's why I think we've been able to grow the business. Of course, I'm just one part of that, but yeah, I think it's more just bloody mindedness and discipline and competitiveness.
Fantastic. Now, Mike, if people want to reach out to you, use your services, check out your podcast, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, well, the podcast is called Geared for Growth, so you can Google that. The business is just MCG, like the cricket ground, but then QS for quantity surveyors, so mcgqs.com.au. You can find me on social media. My name's hard to say, but it's not terribly hard to spell. Reach out, happy to chat, and anything I can do, I'm at their service.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much today for your time to share amazing information all about the property journey, quantity surveying. Yeah, it's just been a fantastic conversation today. So really, really appreciate it, and looking forward to catching up with you soon.
I've had a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, Tyrone.